Hello and welcome to This Date in History, aka TDH. This show is all about the events that occurred today in years past, both recognized by actual historians, but mainly things I personally find intriguing enough for me to bring to you. The source of this information comes from the smart device application Today in History on this day. For links to the app, music, and anything else potentially interesting, check the box below. Anyway, on with the show!
On with the show, indeed. And today is Wednesday, aka Wednesday, December 15th, 2021.
And on this day in 1025, after having ruled for 65 years already as co-emperor, Constantine VIII became the sole ruler of the Byzantine Empire. His reign was short-lived, though, only lasting until his death 3 years later on November 11th, 1028. In 1161, military officers under the command of Emperor Wanyan Lang of the Jin dynasty, already conspiring against their ruler during the Jin-Song Wars, suffered defeat at the Battle of Kaishi, resulting with the emperor's assassination at his camp.
In 1167, to prevent a rebellion, Sicilian Chancellor Stephen Duperche moved the royal court to Messina. In 1270, after a 17-year siege by the Mongols, the Nizari-Ismaili garrison of Irkut, Persia, surrendered. This was only part of a greater campaign against the Nizaris, that having started in 1253 after the Mongols' conquest of the Khwarezmian Empire of Iran.
About 400 years later, in 1651, the last stronghold supporting the king during the Third English Civil War, Castle Cornet in Guernsey, surrendered, prompting a change of ruling for the island country. Somewhere around 150 years later, in 1791, the Virginia General Assembly ratified the United States Bill of Rights.
I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill.
The document comprising of the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution, making it a law.
He signed your bill, now you're a law.
Oh, yes!
In 1836, 9,957 patents issued by the federal government to that date, as well as 7,000 related patent models, perished when the U.S. Patent Office building in Washington, D.C. burnt nearly to the foundations.
Which is probably how people like Thomas Edison got away with stealing and profiting off the works of others.
In 1869, becoming the first attempted established democracy in Japan, the short-lived Republic of Ezo was proclaimed in the Ezo area only to be disestablished on June 27, 1869.
Moving on up to the next century, in 1903, Italo Marchioni, an Italian-American food cart vendor, received his patent for inventing a machine that makes ice cream cones. 14 years later, in 1917, during the Great War, or the War to End All Wars, or World War I as we know it today,
World War I.
Judging by the uniform, yes.
Yes, but what do you mean, one?
Oh, sorry, spoilers.
Enough of this!
Russia and the Central Powers signed an armistice, ceasing hostilities and closing an entire front during the conflict.
Well, I think Mother Russia's had enough of this war. I'll meet with the Germans to settle this score.
Years later, in 1939, premiering at Lowe's Grand Theater in Atlanta, Georgia, Gone with the Wind would eventually become the highest-grossing film, adjusting for inflation, of course. And also, in 1945, during the occupation of Japan, General Douglas MacArthur ordered the Shinto Directive, abolishing Shinto as the state religion of the conquered island nation of the xenophobic expansionists.
About 15 years after that, in 1960, imposing direct rule, King Mahendra of Nepal suspended the country's constitution, dissolved parliament, and dismissed the cabinet.
5 years later, in 1965, crewed by Wally Schirra and Thomas Stafford, Gemini 6A was launched from Cape Kennedy, Florida. This mission go on to see the first space rendezvous, catching up with Gemini 7 after 4 orbits around our third rock of the Sun.
Speaking of space things, in 1970, becoming the first successful soft landing on another planet, Soviet spacecraft Venera 7 touched down and began transmitting data back to home. In 1981, what is currently considered the first modern suicide bombing attack, the Iraqi embassy in Beirut, Lebanon, was leveled by a suicide bomb, killing Iraq's ambassador to Lebanon and 60 others.
In 2000, Chernobyl nuclear power plant's third reactor was finally shut down, meaning it had been actively still supplying power to consumers during the 14 years after the famous Chernobyl incident. And also, a year later, in 2001, having been closed to the public for 11 years, the Leaning Tower of Pisa saw visitors once again after a $27 million effort to stabilize the structure without removing its reason of interest.
And in 2005, the Lockheed Martin F-22 Raptor was introduced into active service for the United States Air Force. Births: Nero, 37, Roman Emperor. Gustave Eiffel, 1832. He was a French architect and engineer and co-designed the Eiffel Tower. Charles Duryea, 1861, United States engineer and businessman, co-founded the Duryea Motor Wagon Company. Freeman Dyson, 1923, English-American physicist and mathematician, theorized the Dyson sphere. Uzziel Gal, 1923, German-Israeli engineer, designed the Uzi gun.
Deaths today. Alfred Bird, 1878, English chemist and businessman, invented baking powder. Then in 1890 we have Sitting Bull, the Hunkpapa Lakota tribal chief. Also in 1966 we have Walt Disney, United States animator, director, producer, and screenwriter, co-founded the Walt Disney Company.
And that concludes the show. Once again, check the underbar for any links you may be interested in. For your dose of Passive Events Daily, I am A.O. Xander.
And I am Who is Alice.
And you are you. Toodles!
Toodles!